Hello, everyone. Welcome and good morning. Thank you for joining our online policy dialogue with the Chinese ambassador to the European Union, His Excellency Fu Cong. Ambassador, welcome. Welcome to Brussels and welcome to European Policy Center.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So the rules of engagement are very clear. I'm Shada Islam. I'm senior advisor at European Policy Center, and it's my pleasure to facilitate this 60-minute dialogue with the ambassador. You will be able to ask questions online. You have a Q&A box. You're used to it by now, so please put your questions there. And after a 30-minute conversation with the ambassador, I will take your questions and ask the ambassador what you want to know as well as what I want to know. So before we start off, let me just say a few words of introduction. And Ambassador, you've been here now for 2 months. Your post was vacant for 10 months. So we're really happy that China has an ambassador here in Brussels accredited to the European Union. You've hit the road running. You've been very, very busy. You've talked to EU policymakers, parliamentarians, and also to a few journalists, I have to say. And you've been quite upbeat. You've been saying that you want a new era in EU China relations, but you've also been very frank and you've recognized and acknowledged that relations today are quite troubled and in quite a precarious state. And of course, also, we can't talk about EU China relations without talking about US China relations, which have an impact on what happens here in Brussels as well. So, Ambassador, before I start all the hard questions, because I have quite a few, I did want to ask you how are you feeling these days? How's it going so far in Brussels?
Thank you. Thank you, Shada. Let me first say that it's a pleasure to be here and it's an honor to be in Brussels serving as an ambassador to EU. And indeed, I've been here for almost 2 months now, and I've kept myself quite busy meeting with different people. And I must say that I've been quite well received by my European colleagues. And and also I want to take this opportunity to say that during all these meetings, the message I've been trying to send out is that China attaches great importance to the China-EU relations, and we think that we are more partners than rivals, quote and unquote. And also we believe that cooperation and partnership are the main theme of our relationship. And so my job here is to enhance the relationship and to improve the atmosphere, if you like, and then to achieve tangible results so that our relationship can be brought to a higher level. Because in our view, this relationship is so important, especially given the background of the profound changes that are taking place politically and also geopolitically, and also the world economy is actually going through a very gloomy period. So it is actually, I would say, incumbent upon China and EU to work together and to improve the world, if you like. Thank you.
Right. Right. The world economy. We've also coming out of a pandemic. And of
Yeah,
course, that's the
exactly.
first question I wanted to put
Uh-huh.
to you as well, is that many of us here in Europe have been quite surprised
Mm.
by the what we see as an overnight reversal of China's zero COVID policies. And a number of people, including European business, is concerned that that shows a certain unpredictability in Chinese decision making. So I was wondering about your comments on that.
Actually, there is no unpredictability on this. First, let me say that this is not a sudden change of policy. Actually, for the past 3 years during the pandemic, actually our policy have been changing, and especially in light with the pandemic situation. For instance, the protocol or the guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health in preventing and treating the disease have been upgraded or updated 10 times. So this was the 10th version of the protocol dealing with the disease. So you can't say that it is a sudden change of policy. And for the latest change, indeed, the reason why we have changed this policy from this dynamic zero policy towards this lifting of the restrictions, especially on the movement of people, is that we see that Omicron, the virus, has actually mutated, and it is very transmissible. But the virulence of this virus has dropped dramatically. And at the same time, the Chinese population, we have achieved what we call the herd immunity through vaccination. So, and also we have taken that decision in light of the experience of other countries, including the European countries. And so it is not a sudden change of policy. And I do not believe that it shows any unpredictability, if you like. And after this reopening of China, I think the people are quite upbeat about the Chinese economy, and this will have a very positive impact on the global economy as well, and also the people-to-people exchange, and the tourism market is thriving. And the other day, I talked to the tourist people here in Brussels. They were quite upbeat about the prospect of Chinese tourists coming back to Europe. You know, Europe is a very attractive destination for
Right.
Chinese tourists.
Yes, it's been a big factor in
Exactly.
EU-China relations, people-to-people discussions. Let's talk a little bit about your hopes and aspirations for a new era, an improvement in EU-China relations. At the moment, there are quite a few points of discord. Of course, China's friendship with Russia is one major source of contention. There's also disagreement on human rights, and of course, how to deal with Taiwan as well. But let's start first with Russia. And your Chinese declaration last year, when the harsh and cruel war started in Ukraine, that this was a no limits friendship. Now we've just heard that President Xi Jinping will be invited to Moscow. And there's concern here because this is for us in Europe an existential problem. And there's concern here that China is not using its power, its friendship, its relationship with Russia to put the pressure for withdrawal from Ukraine and to come to the negotiating table.
Actually, our policy towards Ukraine, towards the Ukrainian crisis, has been quite consistent. Actually, first, we believe that the territorial integrity of all countries should be respected. The international law, in particular, the UN Charter, should be respected. And also, at the same time, the security, legitimate security interests of all sides also need to be taken on board. And also we advocate peaceful negotiation. So we will support and facilitate every effort aimed at achieving peace. And so these are the positions of China when it comes to the Ukrainian crisis. Just now you said that China is not using its influence. Actually, that is not true. Because on the second day of the conflict started, last February, President Xi and President Putin had a very important phone call. And during that phone call, the second day of the start of the conflict, China urged peace and called for negotiation. And later on, China's position has always been that we need to put a stop to the fighting in order to stop the killing, because as we speak, people are being killed. And so, and also when there was a lot talk about the danger of the use of nuclear weapons, China is very clear, has come out very clearly that China is opposed to the use of nuclear weapons. So we are actually using our influence to try to facilitate peace, and to whoever, and not only to talking to Russia, but also to Ukraine. And I would say that we are talking to the Europeans as well. Frankly speaking, we are quite concerned about the possible escalation of this conflict. And we don't believe that only providing weapons will actually solve the problem. We are quite concerned about people talking about winning a complete victory on the battlefield. We believe that the right place should be at the negotiating table. So we called for negotiation, peaceful negotiation, as quickly as possible in order to put a stop to the fighting. So that the territorial integrity and the security concerns of all sides will be taken care of.
Oh, when President Xi Jinping does go to Moscow, are these the kind of points that he will be raising? Is he going?
Well, that I don't know. It has not been announced yet. And China and Russia, we have a multifaceted relationship, as I always say. It's not a one single issue relationship. And so it's natural that there are frequent exchanges of visits by the leaders, as we are planning to do with EU as well. And so I would not be surprised if President Xi goes to Moscow. But frankly speaking, I don't have any news to announce today. And indeed, just with the messages I've been talking just now will be conveyed to Moscow. There's no doubt about that. And we'll urge the cessation of hostility, and we'll urge a quick start of the negotiation. Yes.
There's one point, though, ambassadors, you can understand if that visit does take place, it does send a message to the rest of the world of China and Russia actually working together very, very closely at a time when Russia is clearly the aggressor in Ukraine. So this would be a very strong message to the rest of the world, wouldn't it?
Again, as I said, China and Russia enjoy traditional friendship, and our relationship is multifaceted. So our relationship does not need to be dominated by one issue, or to the exclusion of all other legitimate issues. So we are going to discuss many other things, and of course, the situation in Ukraine is an unavoidable subject, I'm sure. But as I said, we will urge peace and we will urge a negotiation. That's for sure. And so, well, that's we have to say at this moment, yes.
Right. So, Ambassador, moving on to the EU-China relationship, which is very, very important as well. And of course, we've had trouble on many issues. That there was also, we're living at a period of sanctions. Chinese sanctions on some of our parliamentarians, on some of our think tankers, and European sanctions as well. This is, of course, over human rights discord in Xinjiang. You have said, and that's been quite interesting, that there should be a simultaneous move by both sides to lift the sanctions. And I was wondering, you're fresh, you have a new insight, you've come with new perceptions. How do you think this simultaneous removal of sanctions would actually work?
Yes, and so indeed, just now you mentioned there are some points of disagreement and between China and the EU, and there are some issues that China think that need to be dealt with urgently and cautiously. And so the number one issue is the Taiwan issue. So even though you have not asked a question, but I want to say a few words before
please do,
going on
because
to
people
the
make a parallel between what's happening in Ukraine and China's intentions towards Taiwan.
But actually, if now you mentioned Ukraine again, and I must say that I must state upfront that Ukrainian crisis and the Taiwan issue are two completely different things. Ukraine is an independent state, and Taiwan is part of China. So there is no comparability between the two issues. But on the issue of Taiwan, I must say that this one China principle is a red line for us. I must repeat this very strongly. And because the adherence to one China policy and the one China principle is the basis of our Chinese relationship with all foreign countries, including EU. And in 1975, I must draw people's attention to this important commitment that at that time it is still called EEC. The EEC made when they established diplomatic relations with China. At that time, the EEC committed that they will take the EU member states, the member states of EEC will take positions on the issue of Taiwan that are acceptable to China. That's very important. But nowadays, people seem to say that, well, as if a country, any foreign country, has a right to interpret his own one China policy. That is not the case, because back in 1975, the EEC committed that they will take position on Taiwan that should be acceptable to China. And also, the EEC committed that it will not develop any official relations with Taiwan. And it will not sign any agreement with Taiwan. These are very concrete and important commitments. But nowadays, what we are seeing is that there is some erosion of this these basic commitments. We see that the parliamentarians and also senior officials from the EU institutions are also visiting Taiwan. And there was even some talk about signing a trade agreement between EU and Taiwan.
Investment agreement.
Investment agreement. So these are the indirect contravention to the commitments that the EEC had made back in 1975, when the two sides established diplomatic relations. So if these commitments actually were violated, this will fundamentally change or shake the foundation of our bilateral relationship. It is that serious. So I want to draw the attention of our EU partners to the seriousness of this issue. On the human rights you mentioned, indeed, we do have, we recognize that there are differences on human rights issues. But I think, well, actually, all countries actually, who can oppose, who can say no to human rights, right? It's how you interpret human rights, whether those human rights include the rights to development, and and also on the specific issues, there are differences of opinion when it comes to because countries have different background and different history and the culture. So when dealing with specific issues, so the approach they take may be somewhat different from others. So naturally, there will be differences. And we know that the EU countries have some concerns about China's internal human rights issues. And so do we vis-a-vis the EU countries. We also have concerns about the human rights situation in their countries. So, but how do we deal with these differences? That's the key. And now, in our belief, we believe that the right approach should be have a dialogue. We need to talk about these issues, and through these dialogues, we can enhance our mutual understanding of the issues and explain our positions, and hopefully to reduce misunderstanding.
Right.
And so another point on the human rights, and we are areas of time, is that our differences on human rights need to be put in a proper place. It should not proliferate into all areas, because again, China's relationship with the EU is also multifaceted. Right. If we allow these differences to proliferate into other sectors, and that will make our relationship very difficult. That actually goes to the CAI, the comprehensive.
I'll come to that in a minute, okay, Ambassador, if you don't mind. But I just wanted to take you back to the issue of Taiwan. You've recently also had the new Czech president having a phone call with the Taiwanese leader, and you've said this will fundamentally change our relationship. That's quite an important, I would say, threat to the European Union. Taiwan is a member of the World Trade Organization. It participates as an observer in the World Health Assembly. I'm just wondering to what extent does this go? If as a member of the WTO, surely we can have an investment treaty with Taiwan.
No, it's not known. We will not accept a treaty. It is the Taiwan in WTO is a custom entity, a separate custom entity. So it is not a country that with which you can sign agreements. So this is different from a bilateral relationship based on treaties or official agreements. That's different. And on the issue of the WHO, I used to work in WHO, so I know the background. So the reason why Taiwan, the province of Taiwan, I would say, to use the formal term, were invited to attend as an observer to the World Health Assembly was based on this one China policy. Exactly. The reason why it is no longer have the right to send observers to the World Health Assembly is exactly because the Taiwan authorities refuses to accept this one China principle. And that actually deprived Taiwan, because WHO is open only to sovereign states.
Right. Method, I find it's a little difficult to understand how you can actually isolate the province of Taiwan, as you were calling it, from its international encounters and interaction. It is a very important manufacturer of microchips, for instance, one thing, and also a player on the world stage, increasingly in its relationships. So I was just wondering if it isn't time to start having a more, let's say, up-to-date approach towards interaction.
Well, actually, China is not trying to block Taiwan into the world. Actually, our position is it can maintain a trade relationship and economic relationship. Anything that does not imply that Taiwan has a sovereignty, national sovereignty. That's the basic point, because Taiwan is part of China. And indeed, you said the chips. Indeed, Taiwan is a very important producer of the semiconductors. And indeed, it is quite an influential player in that area. And we have done nothing to block that. It's on the contrary, the Taiwanese authorities, actually, they were trying to block the export of those ships to the mainland, right? So we are not trying to block Taiwan from developing economic relations. But the problem is they are trying to use every opportunity to raise it to the political level. When you have the president speaking to the so-called president of Taiwan, to the president of Czech Republic, speaking to the so-called president of Taiwan. So what does that imply, if not political in nature, right? And the
question of interpretation as well, once again.
No, I can't see how you can interpret otherwise, because they're calling themselves president. You can't have a president if it is not a sovereign state, is it?
Right. So are concerns in Europe about increasing, let's say, assertive stance that China is taking towards the province of Taiwan, as you called it, are we right to be concerned? Is there an increasing, let's say, assertiveness, if not aggression, towards Taiwan at the moment, a heightened sense that something could happen?
No, I don't think China is being assertive. China is actually taking, this has been the position that China has always taken in the past decades. And it's only that we are speaking it in clearer terms. And when it comes to talk about assertiveness, we know that some people saying that China is being tough on Taiwan straight. People need to realize one thing. That each time China takes strong positions, we don't deny that, is in response to a provocation from the outside. The latest round is very clear. The former Speaker Pelosi of the United States House of Representatives, we actually urged the U.S. side not to go ahead with that visit. And despite our repeated demarches, the U.S. Pelosi decided to go anyway. So do you expect China to just sit there and see its sovereignty being trampled by another country just like that? Of course, we're going to take a strong reaction to this. But please remember that China has not provoked anything. It is in response to to a provocation. So China is not being assertive.
Ambassador, if we could then come back, we've talked about Ukraine and we've talked about Taiwan, but as you said, the EU-China relationship is multifaceted. And I want to come back to the economy. I want to come back to this comprehensive agreement on investments, which is in limbo at the moment because of the simultaneous sanctions. And one of the things you said that I found was quite interesting is you said, even if the CAI cannot be approved and ratified formally, perhaps some parts of it, because we're talking about economic slowdown happening in the world, and we need to open markets, etc. And your Chinese vice premier, Liu He, told the Davos meeting very recently that China is back, open for investments and a stronger presence on the global stage. So what does that mean for the European Union and for China in terms of their bilateral relationship?
And indeed, after the reopening of China, if you like, because of the thanks to the lifting of the restrictions on the movement of people, indeed, China is back onto the world stage. And economically, we are actually the 20th National Congress of the People of the Communist Party actually laid out a grand blueprint for the next 5 years and even longer. And one of the biggest takeaways from that very important meeting is that China will stick to its policy of reform and open up, and will stick to his policy towards the market economy. And so it should be a good news for the world economy. And we encourage foreign investors to come back to the Chinese market, and we are actually doing a lot to promote trade. Actually, to be more specific, even during the pandemic, the trade between China and other countries have not been affected very severely. But the movement of people, the people-to-people contact. So we are encouraging people to come back to China, and we are actually, our entrepreneurs are also going out and to try to find investment opportunities. And then the CAI. The CAI is an important agreement as a result of 7 years of the hard negotiations. And both sides have shown the great flexibility. And it is a mutually beneficial agreement. That point needs to be borne in mind. It's not as if one side is doing a favor to the other. And we know that the world economy is not going through a very good time. And also, we know that some European business people have some complaints about their access to Chinese market. But actually, this agreement is just to solve all these concerns. And especially given the current circumstances, it is so important that when all economies are trying their best to use all leverages to actually to raise up the economy, if you like. And this useful instrument is laying there in limbo. So we don't want to go back to the history of who was right in imposing sanctions, who was wrong in imposing sanctions, because that will a futile debate, no result. So what we think is that we need to look ahead, and one way is to lift the sanctions simultaneously. We don't need to go back to the origin, and and also we are also practical. We say that if for whatever reason lifting the sanctions simultaneously may not fly, then we are also open to other initiatives.
And
No, actually, we are actually soliciting the initiative from the EU side.
Right.
Our proposal is that we leave the sanctions simultaneously. And if you think that is not good enough, give us some proposals and we are ready to study them. But the principle should be that it should be based on the mutual benefit. You can't pick and choose from the agreement what is only good for you and ignoring, disregarding those provisions
Right.
that actually serve our interests. Because, as I said, this is a 7 years of negotiation, a package. So anything that we can pick from this agreement should still stick to the basic principle of mutuality. It should be mutually beneficial. And nowadays, the European people or the governments like to talk about reciprocity. And the principle of reciprocity should also apply here in this case.
Okay, so mutual. So also, China has been very supportive of Europe's hopes and aspirations and plans for strategic autonomy. And yet, Ambassador, you've gone on record also as being quite critical of some of the trade defensive measures, which we would argue are part of the strategic autonomy. So I was wondering, how do you square that circle, really? Shouldn't the European Union be working, as China is actually at the moment, to reduce its dependencies on external suppliers of critical raw materials or critical equipment?
And first, let me say that we support the strategic autonomy of EU. Actually, we have been saying that loud and clear. And but your interpretation of strategic autonomy is quite, I would say, limited.
Right.
And in our view, when it comes to the to trade and economics, we should abide by the WTO rules, right? And there are rules that need to be abided by. And frankly speaking, we are following those what we call the toolkits of EU with quite some concern, and we see that sometimes those tools borders on protectionism,
Right.
and sometimes it allowed politics to interfere with trade too much. That is not strategic autonomy, frankly speaking. That is actually, uh, you will lose strategic autonomy by linking those political issues with trade issues. That's how I understand the situation. So if we are in business, let's talk about business. Why do you need to have all those entrepreneurs be studying all these political issues? And some of the political accusations against China were actually based on misinformation and sometimes even outright lies. And then you ask the entrepreneurs to abide by some of the so-called rules based that are based on the misinformation.
Can you give an example where you think your exporters or your manufacturers are facing these kinds of unfair rules?
Exactly. For instance, in the case of Xinjiang, just now you mentioned, there were so many outrageous accusations, saying that the genocide being the most prominent one. I hope people would understand what genocide really means. Genocide means the massacre of Jews by Germany. Massacre means the genocide means the massacre of the Indians in North America. So these are the
genocide also means reducing a community or an ethnicity's power and its population and its influence.
And
that's also genocide.
That's a very broad interpretation of genocide.
That is the interpretation.
Actually, in China, in the case of Xinjiang, the population actually grew from 2 million to the population of Uyghurs.
Faith, a community's faith. Genocide also perhaps means also controlling the community's faith.
The controlling, well, actually, in the case of Xinjiang, first let me say that the population have increased, dramatically from 2 million to 12 million. So this is not genocide in our view. And when it comes to the faith, you can look at how many mosques there are in Xinjiang. So the people there can worship.
Okay.
And then the question is, they some of the regulations the EU issue in terms of trade talks about forced labor and so on and so forth. There is one that is being considered. That is, you need to have a due diligence to show that there is no forced labor and so on and so
in the
forth.
chain, in the supply
So
chain.
exactly.
Yes.
So in our view, this is not warranted, and because this will increase the cost for the enterprises, for the companies, and sometimes it will be open to all kinds of groundless accusations, which will in turn interfere with the business.
Right. Ambassador, that is the due diligence is not just meant for China, actually. I mean, it is broader than that. But let me come now to the questions. And thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Please keep them coming. I'm going to go through them. Let's start with the economic side of things. So there is a question about solar panels. Yes, so there's a question from Jan von Herf. He says, can you comment about reports of possible export restrictions on solar components? I was wondering if you've heard of that, Ambassador, because that's something that is quite of concern, obviously, at a time when we're working towards renewable energies. And there's also then massive subsidies. So China has given massive subsidies to its companies over decades and considers them as barely independent from the state. So why should the EU not implement protectionist measures in support of a state economy, state-dominated companies? Those two questions.
Actually, I'll comment on the subsidies. Actually, when it comes to the subsidies, and actually China is party to the WTO agreement on subsidies. And actually China has removed all the state subsidies that are prohibited under that agreement. So all the subsidies that China is doing is in compliance with the WTO agreement. That point needs to be borne in mind. And secondly, actually, we do not rule out, or we do not think that all state subsidies are bad, and because some of them actually can provide guidance for the companies in terms of the investment, and this will actually serve the purpose of a green economy, for instance, right? And but those subsidies need to be in compliance with international rules, namely the WTO rules. So when it comes to Europe, and if Europe at the end of the day decides to provide the state subsidies to their companies, then we'll have to study whether those rules were in compliance or in contravention with the WTO rules. And if the latter is the case, then we'll take measures.
Okay, so that's another move that could come.
Yeah.
Let me go
talking about the solar panels.
Yes, exactly.
Frankly speaking, I don't know what exactly this person is referring to.
There are reports, Ambassador, that there are possible export restrictions on solar components.
By whom?
By China.
By China.
Yeah.
Actually, we I don't know. Then I have to reserve my comment.
No,
because I don't think how China will restrict. I see. I know what it means. That there were only some unofficial reports. I would think, yes. I don't think. Yes, I don't think this has been announced by the government.
Right.
So I will not defend.
Something
yeah, actually, for us, the reverse used to be the case, right? The solar panels.
World changes.
Yeah, the solar panels exported to Europe and to the US were actually severely restricted by the recipient side,
Yes,
not by the
anti-dumping duties were
exactly.
imposed. Yes.
So I don't think that at least it should not become a wholesale restriction on the part of China.
Right. So the world is changing, Ambassador, as you pointed out, on questions of subsidies, on export controls. We're seeing also many export controls going into action. The US is doing so also vis-a-vis China. So it's a changing trade landscape as well. Let me come back to the questions because I think this is a very useful conversation, Ambassador. Once again, thank you for being so frank and so very open. There's a question here from Maria Wesnika. She's asking about the China 14+1 cooperation with the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. It used to be 17+1, 16+1, and now it's down to 14+1. So what are the perspectives?
Actually, for us, we are ready to cooperate with all countries. And actually, this 17+1 dialogue actually was initiated frankly speaking, jointly by China and some Eastern European countries. And the purpose is to provide, is for China to provide assistance in the building of some basic infrastructure. And this has been, there are some quite successful projects in that respect. And so we'll be happy to continue with cooperation. But again, it takes two to tango. And if you really want to have cooperation, if the other side doesn't want to maintain that cooperation, it's up to them. But our intention has never been to divide Europe. Let's make that point very clear. And actually, those people who actually know the origin of this program told me that actually, on the contrary, China initiated jointly with some countries this dialogue is specifically to help some of the Western Eastern European countries to develop their economy so that they can meet the requirement that are for joining the EU.
Right. So it's a helpful tool. Let me just come back to that for a second, Ambassador, because the Belt and Road Initiative was also quite an important part of your work and cooperation with Central and Eastern Europe. The European Union now has its Global Gateway project, which many see as a kind of rival or competitor for the Belt and Road Initiative. So the question would be, do you see any movement of synergies between the two? Do you think you can work together rather than being on separate rival tracks?
Indeed. We know that the EU, I'm sorry for being so blunt, EU actually initiated this program as a counterweight against the China's Belt and Road Initiative.
They never said so.
Okay, good. I hope it is misinformation again. But let me say this. China sees this in a positive light. Indeed, we have many things that we can connect with each other. And the world is so big, and the requirement or the demand for infrastructure is so great that no single country can monopolize or can meet the demands.
It's trillions of dollars.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll be happy to join hands with EU in implementation of both our programs in Africa, in Central Asia. Actually, I personally have already started some talks with the EU officials on how we can cooperate in Central Asia.
Right. And there's a question here, actually might interest you, from Mohammed Babika, and he talks about working together in Africa. So what is China's position? And you've obviously said that could be something that you would. Yeah. All right.
China is ready to join with anyone to help out the African brothers to develop their economy.
Right. So there's a kind of clarification coming in from Jan van Herf, and he said he just wants to clear for you, and I think that's perhaps something useful for you. The export restrictions that are causing some panic among certain businesses would affect wafers, black silicon, and so-called ingots. And without these materials, solar manufacturing is impossible. So that's something for you to learn and to take forward.
Actually, I know that, but it's not the solar panel itself. It's some of the raw materials, if I understood it correctly.
Right. Okay. So there's a question from a former European parliamentarian, Joe Leinen, which says, you mentioned reciprocity, which you did, Ambassador. What does this actually mean? Should Chinese companies only be allowed to do in the European Union what European Union companies are allowed to do in China? Is that reciprocity?
Well, actually, reciprocity is a principle that all sides need to abide by. But as to how to interpret this, I think we should not be like a tit for tat tactic, right? Our economies are different, the structure of economy. That's why I say that China and EU and European countries in general, we are complementary to each other in economics, right? So whether we should just like a tit for tat reciprocity as a principle.
What China did, to be frank, on the sanctions issue, China did do the tit for tat.
But that is only when it is right. But when it in economics, it is more complex, I would say, right?
Okay. Okay, yeah. So let's move to the Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Development Initiative that China has taken, the Global Security Initiative, because both China and the European Union talk about multilateralism and how committed they are to that. And there's a question here from Dak Suranda, who says, what does what does China think about the plans or the hopes? I'm just have to actually make it more succinct for reform in the multilateral institutions, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, as well as the Paris Agreement on Climate Action. So this is about supporting the Sustainable Development Goals, which, if I'm not wrong, are badly off track at the moment.
Yes, indeed. Actually, China, well, first let me say that China advocates multilateralism like EU. And when it comes to the global governance, actually China is actually a strong advocate for reforming some of the major institutions, including the World Bank and IMF.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you're continuing, and the Global Development Initiative that China has taken that we don't really talk about much. I mean,
well, actually, indeed, China, we will have two major initiatives. One is the global economic.
One is a global security initiative,
and
one
the
is
other
a
is
global development initiative.
Development
and both are multilateral in nature.
Exactly.
Right.
So our the ideas there are actually to enhance global cooperation, both in the development field and also in security field. And so that's the underlying principle. And actually the development initiative actually manifests itself very clearly in the Belt and Road Initiative. So these are all linked. But when it comes to the security, we also believe that now the world is undergoing profound changes in security.
We can see that.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we if you read President Xi's statement on the security initiative, we advocate a cooperative security concept. So the security can only be achieved through cooperation and the mutual security. You can't have one side enjoying the absolute security while ignoring the legitimate security concerns of other sides. That's the key point. So, and we also advocate the importance to abide by the international law and in particular the UN Charter and all these things. And so we are actually the purpose. We don't have any hidden agenda here. We know that some people saying that China wants to undermine,
reorganize the world order. Ambassador. You're not.
We're not. Actually, we are advocating the commitment or recommitment, if you like, to the UN Charter. How can that be interpreted as reorganizing? And when it comes to cooperative security and the mutual security, these are some basic concepts that have been developed after the Second World War. And these are the many of the principles that are based on these basic concepts. So we are not trying to reorganize anything, and we want to make the world a better place.
Right.
That is
Okay.
the
But a
tenet.
better place where China has more influence.
Well, we hope we can have more influence, mm, but not at the cost of the entire global structure, as some people accuse us of doing. No, that is not the case. We, of course, which country would not like to see its country being having more influence in the world, right? And it's natural that as China develops, of course, we want to see China playing a bigger role in the international arena, and of course, we will be in a better position to safeguard our legitimate interests.
Some would argue that China is already doing that, Ambassador. A number of international bodies, a number of international posts are already very, very much under China's influence and control, in a sense, authority.
Yeah, under the influence or control of China is going a bit too far.
Okay.
Indeed, in certain cases, Chinese candidate has been elected as head of the organization. But well, China is number two in financial contributions, and politically, China is a big power. So why can't Chinese candidates be the head of the international organizations? If you look at the number of places, China is lagging behind. You look how many U.S. Nationals are the heads of UN organizations, and you look how many the nationals are occupying important places by the UK and France, by Western countries.
Right.
If you compare that, China is lagging far behind. Actually, I used to work in the UN system. I know this whole picture. And China is far behind compared to these Western countries in terms of the post China occupies in the UN system.
So, Ambassador, we're coming almost to the end of our conversation. So, I have a question here, which is about export controls again, and it's about your view on the Netherlands joining the US to implement technology export controls against China. Yes, this is the recent decision that was taken. So, how do you see that happening?
Well, actually, first, let me say that we have not seen the content of this agreement.
Okay.
I don't think I don't understand why they keep it so secretive. And secondly, we see that this is a typical example of politically interfering in the trade of technology. Oh, that this is not in the interest of Netherlands. It's not in the interest of, frankly speaking, it's not in the interest of the U.S. Economically, because the U.S. companies are complaining about this. But the U.S., for political and geopolitical reasons, they are trying to block, decouple China from the global supply chain in order to contain China. I don't think the world should allow this dangerous tendency to develop. So if this tendency is allowed to develop further, will parallel
Bifurcated world.
Exactly. So so that is, I don't think, is something that we should like to see.
Many are worried, and I know this is true in business circles in Europe as well, that China is already withdrawing. I mean, I know that you've talked about China being back, but there are also signs of dual circulation strategy and the rest of it.
Yeah.
So aren't countries, not just the US, but aren't countries actually looking inwards now?
Actually, no. I think I know the dual circulation plan has received some attention. I would say that the outside world has wrongly interpreted this our plan. When we talk about dual circulation, and indeed we emphasize the importance of the domestic market.
That's right.
China is such a huge market, so domestic consumption should be one important driver for economic development. So there's nothing wrong in it. And why shouldn't we when we have such a huge market domestically? But it doesn't mean that China is going to close its door. On the contrary, as I said, China is opening up further. And this message is loud and clear from the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party. And you can't have a higher authority than this in our policy announcement. So people or the world should rest assured that China will not close its doors, and the opening up policy will continue. If anything, the door will be opened further and at a higher level. Now we are talking about institutional open up. That means foreign companies will be invited to participate in the standard setting in China and in formulating regulations, national regulations when it comes to economic affairs. And they will be participating in a more predictable, you just now you talk about predictability, in a more predictable and legally guaranteed manner in this Chinese economy. So these are very good news for the foreign companies. So there is no risk of closing up. That's the message I want to convey.
Thank you very much. That's a very encouraging message indeed in these very difficult economic times. We are almost 3 minutes away, and I just wanted to ask you another question that's come in, and this is something that we had noticed, and obviously you've heard about it and probably had maybe were part of it, Ambassador. The period of Wolf War diplomacy, is that now over? Was it considered an error? Can we now look forward to less Wolf warrior diplomacy?
Well, actually, I don't know what people mean by wolf. How do you say that? Wolf war, wolf warrior.
Chinese movie that made
yeah, exactly.
Everyone trembled in fear.
That that may be because the Chinese diplomats are becoming more outspoken.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're enjoying that.
Exactly. So you should enjoy that, right? The actually, I don't know. More on a more serious note, we actually, for us, actually for all diplomats, the one of the most important job or task is to win friends, right? And we that's what we are trying to do. And maybe sometimes, but at the same time, when China's fundamental interests are being at stake, it is also incumbent on all Chinese diplomats to stand out and do what he can to safeguard its national security and national interests. So that does not mean that the Chinese diplomats are wolf warriors. No, actually, this is common to all diplomats. I don't know how you call American diplomats when they criticize or China on almost every single issue.
Right. We're not going there yet. We were talking about EU-China relations. Thank you very much. Now, to everyone who's asked questions, the ambassador has answered many of them. So if I haven't asked you again about Ukraine or Taiwan, it's because the ambassador did at the start really handle those questions for a very, very long time indeed. So that's why some of your questions are not here. But I can tell you, Ambassador, many of the questions are coming in again about, that China was pleading for the EU not to choose between the US and China, but in fact, China is choosing Russia over or in disregard for international law. So these are the questions that will keep coming up. My final question.
That is true.
Of course, you would not. But these are some of our concerns. And I think it's very important that all of them are expressed and voiced in our very frank and open conversation with you. 1 minute left for you. And I just want to ask you, what's your big hope now for the next 4 years that you will be here? What do you hope to achieve? 1 minute to answer.
Actually, two
Ambassador.
things. One is to improve the political environment of between China and the EU. And secondly, we want to see some deliverables delivered, some tangible results reaping from this very important relationship. So I'm working on both fronts.
Okay. Well, I can say thank you very much for coming here to European Policy Center. Thank you for being very frank and open. You've sent some very strong messages. I think we'll still have to digest them and process them. And I look forward to further conversations with you, Ambassador. Thank you once again. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.